Hello again, my dear emperors. I'm Marco, and tonight we're drifting into the story of Palestine and Israel. I guess. Why I guess? Because this isn't your usual history lecture. Here, you don't just observe the past, you become part of it. We speak in second person, we dip into sarcasm, and we blur the line between fact and dream, from olive groves to minarets, from prophets on foot to borders drawn in sand, from za'atar on warm bread to the crackle of conflict. This story doesn't begin with a UN resolution, it begins on a straw mat, in the year 1800, as morning dust floats through the air, and a call to prayer hovers like a bird that never lands. So, let the noise of the world fade away, dim the lights, and let me take you back. You rise early, your feet dusty before your thoughts are even clear. The village is simple, stone homes clustered around a spring, families rising with the sun, chickens negotiating loudly with cats. You are in Palestine, but this Palestine is not a country. It is an Ottoman district, part of a sprawling empire where identities are fluid and borders more conceptual than real. The people around you are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Armenian, Greek, Circassian, languages and customs interweaving like the threads of a worn rug. No one calls themselves a Palestinian in the nationalist sense, but if you ask them, they'll say they're from Nablus, or Jaffa, or Jerusalem, places as real to them as gravity. Ottoman rule here is both distant and suffocating. Taxes are heavy, corruption is expected, and reforms are promised, but not always delivered. The empire is aging, not gracefully, mind you, but like a pasha trying to dance with gout. You see tax farmers shake down villagers, Ottoman governors more interested in extracting wealth than administering justice. Yet despite this, the land breathes a deep, steady rhythm. Farmers plough the same terraces their ancestors did, olive presses churn, and soap from Nablus travels to the far corners of the empire. But change is rumbling. The 19th century Ottoman reforms, Tanzimat, they call it, promise equality and new rights. In theory, in practice, they bring land registration systems that favour the literate and the wealthy, which, spoiler alert, is not the average peasant. Land begins slipping from locals to absentee landlords in Beirut and Damascus. The seeds of future conflicts are being sown in legal ledgers and tax books. You hear rumours from Europe, something about Jews wanting to return, but it's just talk, right? Mostly your concerns are local, drought, taxes, the occasional plague of locusts. Jews live here too, mostly in Jerusalem, Safed, Hebron, and Tiberias. Sephardic, Mizrahi, Arabic-speaking. They are part of the local mosaic. You trade with them, sometimes argue with them, rarely, but memorably, marry across lines. They are not strangers. Historians still argue whether this period was truly peaceful coexistence, or just the calm before identity hardened into nationalism. You, however, just live it. You are more concerned with making sure your olive harvest isn't stolen by some bored Ottoman patrol than in the philosophical implications of ethno-religious identity. There is no Israel yet. There is no Palestine as a nation. Just land, families, prayers, and the occasional earthquake to remind you who's really in charge. Still, even this quiet has an undertone. The empire weakens, and European consulates begin appearing like mushrooms after rain. They bring coins, maps, missionaries, and schools. Schools that teach ideas like liberty, nationalism, and oh dear, self-determination. These ideas are like incense, heady, foreign, and intoxicating if you inhale too deeply. So you go about your day, harvesting, arguing about dowries, praying, watching clouds roll over the hills of Galilee. You don't know it yet, but this peace is a glass one. Soon winds will arrive from Europe with names like Herzl and Balfour, and they will stir the sand beneath your feet. But that can wait until you wake. You feel it first in the breeze that arrives not from the coast, but from Vienna, Odessa, and the smoky cafes of Paris. A breeze of ideas, impossible dreams, and the stubborn refusal to let exile remain a permanent condition. It's the late 19th century now, and while your feet are still in the Levant, the ideas gathering overhead are entirely European. The people who will one day argue bitterly over whose land this is haven't even arrived yet. But their thoughts are packing. In the salons of Europe, Jewish intellectuals are staring down a wall. On one side, centuries of persecution, pogroms, and polite rejections by liberal society. On the other, a dream of a homeland. Not metaphorical, not in heaven, not someday here, on earth, and specifically in the place where your goats currently graze. They call it Zionism. You, perhaps, just call it Thursday. Enter Theodor Herzl, a journalist with a flair for drama and facial hair that screams 1890s. Herzl watches the Dreyfus affair unfold in France and concludes something bold. Jews will never be safe unless they have a state of their own. Radical? Certainly. Popular? Not exactly. Many European Jews think he's being dramatic. Others think he's too secular. Others too nationalist. But Herzl is undeterred. In 1896, he writes Der Judenstaat, outlining his vision. A year later, in 1897, he hosts the first Zionist Congress in Basel. You're not invited. To be fair, most people in Palestine aren't. This vision, this Zionism, is complicated even then. Some want a secular refuge, others a spiritual rebirth. Some want coexistence with Arabs, others not so much. And where should it be? Argentina, Uganda. Herzl actually considers these options. Historians still argue whether he ever truly believed in Palestine as the only option, or whether he bowed to the spiritual pull of Zion once other plans failed. Either way, Palestine soon becomes the poetic and increasingly political choice. But the Congress is electric. Speeches in German, applause, declarations. In Basel, Herzl famously writes in his diary, "I founded the Jewish state." And while no state materializes just yet, the intention is there, crackling like lightning in the distance. You still plough your fields, unaware that maps are being redrawn in the minds of men who've never touched Levantine soil. Meanwhile, you hear things. A teacher in the town mentions Jews arriving from Russia. They're buying land, legally, usually from absentee landlords. The peasants who farmed that land, often evicted, not by cruelty, but by contract. And yet cruelty is rarely far from paperwork. Displacement doesn't need a villain when a deed of sale will do. At first, it's uneasy, but not violent. Coexistence is possible. You share markets. You argue over water rights. A goat might wander into a vineyard. No one loves it, but no one dies. Yet, because the idea of Palestine as your land hasn't crystallized yet, and theirs is still mostly an idea, but ideas have a way of thickening into borders. The first wave comes, the first Aliyah, between 1882, mostly religious Jews from Eastern Europe, idealists and pioneers. They build small agricultural settlements with names like Rishon LeZion and Petah Tikva. They come with hope and malaria. You see them from a distance, struggling with the rocky soil, speaking in strange tongues, sometimes hiring local Arab laborers to help. These are not conquerors, not yet. They are farmers with dreams, shovels, and some very unfortunate mustaches. Some of the early Zionists even fantasize about coexistence. There are Hebrew essays, genuine idealistic, about building a joint Jewish-Arab utopia. It's beautiful. It's also a little naive. Most locals aren't reading Herzl. They're reading the sky to see if it will rain. And you certainly don't know that dream is starting to believe in itself. Still, these ideas begin to plant roots in places invisible to you. Zionism is gaining institutions, the Jewish National Fund to buy land, Hebrew language schools, a political infrastructure in waiting. The movement is young, clumsy, not yet threatening, but it is here. So as you sip your coffee in the shade of an olive tree, you might wonder why land prices are going up, why a cousin's family had to move inland, why people in your village whisper more these days. You don't yet know that you are being written into someone else's dream. You're walking past a stretch of stony hills near Zikron Yaakov, and the air smells like wine, bad wine if we're being honest. It's 1903, and the first Aliyah has wheezed its way toward the end of a very long, very dusty chapter. Some of the settlers are leaving, disillusioned by locusts, debt, and the small issue of not knowing how to farm. Others stay, marrying their ideological stubbornness with French Rothschild funding. Spoiler, that funding helps, a lot. Now comes the second Aliyah. This new wave, mostly from Russia and Poland, arrives differently. Less religious, more political. They're not just escaping pogroms. They're bringing with them ideologies, socialism, secularism, Hebrew revival. If the first wave planted trees, this one builds philosophies. You see them arrive, skinny, wide-eyed, tired, talking about revolution while trying not to get dysentery. They found kibbutzim, collective farms, that feel a bit like communes with fewer guitars. They speak Hebrew, not Yiddish, because a guy named Eliezer ben Yehuda has decided Hebrew must be reborn. Historians still argue whether Hebrew was truly dead or just very, very sleepy. Either way, it wakes up angry and ambitious. You notice something changing. These new arrivals aren't just working the land, they want to own it, exclusively. Hebrew labor becomes a slogan. It sounds poetic. It also means no Arab workers. You begin to hear of strikes, land disputes, a slow cultural fencing off. The dream of utopia starts developing zoning laws. The Ottoman Empire is still technically in charge, but its grip is like an old man's handshake, soft, inconsistent, and mostly ceremonial. Local Arab peasants, for the most part, still don't see this as a zero-sum game. They resent land loss, sure, but nationalism, not yet. Your identity is tied to your family, religion, maybe your town, not to a flag that doesn't yet exist. You begin to see signs, both literal and metaphorical, of change. Hebrew-only schools, Jewish-run postal services, agricultural training centers with blueprints and barbed wire. It feels like a proto-country is beginning to flicker into existence, not declared but practiced. But the Zionists, they're thinking in statehoods. They create the Hashemah, a self-defense militia that patrols settlements with rifles and a lot of nighttime drama. You hear their boots on trails at dusk. Their tales grow mythic. 2 men and a mule defending an outpost against bandits. Romantic, possibly exaggerated, but important, because every nation needs its origin stories. Still, it's not all tension. There are friendships, business relationships. Some Jews and Arabs teach each other languages. A shared cup of tea can blur boundaries in ways ideology never can. But each passing year, that blur sharpens. The Zionist movement is organizing, funds are flowing in, land is being bought in chunks too large to ignore. In Jaffa, the bustle of the port is louder now. Ships arrive with Hebrew books, industrial machinery, and young men who talk about class struggle over hummus. You hear of a new neighborhood nearby, Tel Aviv. They say it's going to be the first modern Hebrew city. At the time, it sounds like a niche tourist gimmick. Spoiler, it's not. Still, war feels far off. It always does, until it's not. Tensions start popping, like oil in a skillet. The Ottoman authorities try to limit Jewish immigration, but their bark is worse than their bureaucracy. Land transfers continue. More settlers arrive. And while the Zionists build schools and orchards, Arab villagers begin to ask sharper questions. Why are our tenants being evicted? Why are we being replaced? The land remains beautiful, but now it dreams in 2 languages, and both think they're native. You're back under your olive tree, watching a young Jewish girl bike past in bloomers, scandalous, and you sip your tea, wondering if any of this will last. You don't yet see it, but you are standing on a fault line. Ideologies are stacking above you, tectonic and patient. The air thickens with politics now, and not the usual Ottoman flavour of bribery, boredom, and occasional paperwork misfiled under a date tree. No, this is different. This is modern unrest, a nervous rhythm beneath your daily routine. The year is 1910, and you feel the empire itself starting to wheeze like a caravan camel that's gone too many miles without water. The Tanzimat reforms promised equality for all, but somehow they keep delivering inequality in new packaging. You watch neighbours lose land they've farmed for generations because someone in Beirut signed a deed they never saw. It doesn't feel like colonialism. It isn't, technically, but it rhymes with it in unpleasant ways. And so begins a slow erosion, not just of land, but of trust. It begins with reforms, always reforms. The Ottomans, desperate to modernize and compete with the West, start issuing land laws. Sounds harmless enough, but you notice that suddenly land must be registered. Great, except if you're illiterate, which, let's face it, most villages are. So who registers it? Often absentee landlords in cities far away. And who do they sell it to? Well, guess who just arrived from Russia with idealism and cash? Meanwhile, Egypt is stirring things up, as Egypt often does. You remember the brief time when Muhammad Ali's dynasty ruled this area. He modernized some things, taxed everyone to death, and then politely exited when the Ottomans and the British tag-teamed to shove him back. But his fingerprints remain: conscription, infrastructure, and a memory of Arab strength. It lingers like a perfume you can't quite place. Now, local Arab elites begin organizing at first gently. They publish newspapers, hold debates, petition Istanbul. It's more coffee house than battlefield, but it's the embryo of what you'll later call Arab nationalism. And in a poetic twist, some of these early nationalists support Jewish immigration. Historians still argue whether they were being idealistic or just hadn't read the fine print yet. Jaffa becomes a pressure cooker. More Jews arrive every month. Some are religious. Others look like they just fell out of a Marxist pamphlet. You hear Hebrew on every corner now. The port swells with people, crates and expectations. The city's Arab majority grows uneasy. You feel it in the market: cold shoulders, rising prices, whispered complaints. The cosmopolitan buzz of coexistence starts sounding like static. You attend a wedding where the groom is Arab and the musician is Jewish. No one objects, but something's off. People drink, dance, but don't quite relax. You hear someone mutter, "Things aren't like they used to be." You nod. You don't know what's changed exactly, but something has. Yet in Jerusalem, the sacred city still staggers along under its strange truce. Muslims, Christians, and Jews jostle past each other on holy cobblestones, each convinced that their prayers matter more per square meter. You walk its alleys, ducking between incense smoke and religious tension, wondering how this city hasn't caught fire yet. The answer is not for lack of trying. Back in the villages, rumours travel fast and outpace facts. People say Jews want to take everything. Others say Arabs are organising to kick them out. Neither is entirely true, but both are useful to someone. Tension metastasizes into paranoia, and as everyone starts looking over their shoulders, local Ottoman governors do what they do best: pretend not to notice. And still, the empire totters. The Young Turks have taken over, in Constantinople, preaching modernization and Turkish nationalism, neither of which really helps you here. You're too Arab to be Turkish, too peasant to be elite, too caught in someone else's chess game to know who's winning. Yet life goes on. You still plant olives, argue about dowries, avoid Ottoman tax collectors when you can, but the land now hums with suspicion. The neighbours who used to be neighbours are now them. The paper trail of land titles becomes more important than the soil under your feet. Then a gunshot in the hills, a scuffle over land, maybe self-defence, maybe something darker. The details are murky, but the effect is clear. The illusion of inevitability, of peaceful absorption, of mutual destiny starts to flicker. But that, my dear Emperor, can wait until the guns wake you up. You don't know it yet, but the world is about to explode in war. And when it does, this patch of earth so overlooked for so long will become the center of a question no one has ever really answered. Whose land is this anyway? British boots march down Jaffa Road. Officers wear too much khaki and carry too much confidence. General Allenby enters Jerusalem on foot. A theatrical gesture meant to show humility. It doesn't. The locals aren't impressed, but the photographers are. That image of Allenby humbling himself before the holy city will be printed in newspapers from London to Lahore. What goes unprinted is the confusion beneath it all. Because while the war ends, the promises begin. And the British, they promise generously. You awake to a world reshaped by a war that wasn't yours, yet somehow rewrote your sky. It's 1917. The Ottomans have lost. The British have arrived. And Palestine is no longer just a sleepy province on the margins of empires. It's a prize, a puzzle, and increasingly, a promise. You step into a new colonial morning where nothing has changed and yet everything is different. To the Arabs, they offer independence. Sharif Hussein of Mecca is told that if he helps fight the Ottomans, he'll get an Arab kingdom stretching from Aleppo to Aden. Spoiler, he doesn't. Historians still argue whether the British meant to actually create a Jewish state, or just wanted to curry favour with Jewish elites during the war. Either way, it's now on paper, and paper, as always, proves more powerful than ploughs. To the Jews, they offer something else entirely. Enter the Balfour Declaration, a single sentence with seismic consequences. His Majesty's government view, with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. It's 67 words long, and hedged with phrases like "nothing shall prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities." That's you, by the way, reduced to a footnote in a dream. You begin to notice changes. Hebrew signs go up. Zionist institutions begin operating openly. The British allow Jewish immigration. Land continues to be sold, some legally, some quietly. A Jewish agency is established to represent Zionist interests. You look for the Arab agency. There isn't one. You hear debates in tea houses. It's a homeland, not a state, someone says. Another scoffs, and my goat is a diplomat. Trust erodes. Language hardens. Jew and Arab stop being religious descriptors and start becoming national identities. Still, the British are charming at first. Civilized, polite. They promise to modernize, to build roads, to keep the peace. You even believe them. For about 5 minutes. Then come the protests. Arab farmers march against land sales. There are clashes. People die. The British respond with commissions, reports, and more soldiers. You see a new class emerging. Arab intellectuals, lawyers, journalists, people who don't farm, but speak for the farmers. They demand national rights. The British listen politely, then file the demands under maybe later. And yet you can't help but marvel. The energy is infectious. There's music, literature, debates, cafes, a sense of purpose. You don't have to agree with the Zionist project to be intrigued by its momentum. It feels like watching someone build a ship while you're still arguing over whose turn it is to dig the harbour. The Zionists, meanwhile, aren't wasting time. They establish the Histadrut, a labour union, the Haganah, a defence force, and dozens of kibbutzim. Hebrew is everywhere. Tel Aviv is no longer a sleepy neighbourhood. It's a city, a symbol, a statement. You visit once and feel like you've crossed a border. So you retreat to your village. You tend your olives. You pretend the world hasn't changed. But it has. There's a new sign in your post office. Mandate Palestine. A British flag flaps above it. And behind that flag, behind those promises, a storm is gathering. And you're stuck in between. You see Jewish friends who just want peace. You see Arab cousins who've lost land and dignity. You want to believe in coexistence, but the space between identities is shrinking. There's no room to stand that doesn't put you in someone's way. But tension, like humidity, settles into everything. By 1920, the riots begin. Arab mobs attack Jewish neighborhoods in Jerusalem. The British fire into crowds. Jewish militias retaliate. Blood stains the cobblestones of cities that were supposed to be holy. One promise too many, one homeland too crowded, one future too fractured. But all that can wait until tomorrow. You wake up to the metallic scent of uncertainty and the faint smell of fresh concrete. It's the early 1920s and Palestine feels like it's holding its breath. The British Mandate has officially begun, which means London is now in charge, whether you like it or not. They bring with them cricket, bureaucracy, and a belief that you can administrate your way out of any problem. Spoiler, you can't. At first, the British try to play both sides. They host ceremonies with Arab notables one day, and toast the Jewish agency the next. They declare loyalty to all communities, then build institutions that favour one. It's like trying to balance a teacup on a galloping camel. The Balfour Declaration now has a postal address. The Mandate formalises British control and makes them, in theory, the neutral referees between two increasingly agitated teams. But these teams are playing different sports entirely. The Zionist movement is organised, centralised, well-funded. The Arab population, fragmented, reactive, and deeply sceptical of the referees' objectivity. Meanwhile, in the Arab villages, suspicion hardens into anger. More land is sold, more peasants evicted. It's legal, yes, but legality is a poor substitute for justice. When your grandfather's orchard now grows someone else's almonds, petitions are written, protests held, and always the British say the same thing: we'll look into it. The Jews build and build. Tel Aviv is now bustling, whitewashed, and humming with cafes, print shops, and the tapping of typewriters, spelling out Hebrew reborn. There's a real sense that something is being constructed, not just homes, but identity, continuity, a future. New immigrants arrive, idealistic and sunburned, speaking languages that soon dissolve into Hebrew classrooms. There's an electricity in the air, not all of it metaphorical. Then come the riots. In 1921, violence breaks out in Jaffa. Dozens are killed. The British respond by suspending Jewish immigration briefly, then reopening it. Their reports are eloquent, their policies muddled. Arabs feel betrayed. Jews feel endangered. Everyone feels watched. Historians still argue whether the British ever had a plan. Some say they wanted a binational state. Others claim they hoped the problem would solve itself. But from where you sit, on a worn wooden stool under a flickering lantern, it looks like they're just improvising with impressive accents. You hear a new word whispered with dread: Ergon, a breakaway Jewish militia less restrained than the Haganah, more interested in making statements with bombs than with speeches. On the Arab side, factions grow, some influenced by pan-Arabism, others local and tribal. There's no unifying leader, only unifying frustration. Still, some try to build bridges. Arab and Jewish intellectuals hold dialogues. They publish essays, attend dinners. It's all very hopeful, and all very short-lived, because every handshake is shadowed by new arrivals, new settlements, new policies from far-off London. The economy tilts dangerously. Zionist institutions create jobs for Jews. Arab unemployment rises. Tensions metastasize into resentment. In villages, people say they want a homeland here. Then more quietly, where will we go? You watch Jerusalem grow uneasy. British soldiers patrol nervously. Jews pray at the Western Wall under stricter rules. Arabs march with banners demanding independence. The city's sacred stones absorb fear like moisture. Every festival now feels like a spark waiting for fuel. You ask questions too. Is coexistence still possible? Can two national dreams share the same mattress? You remember a Jewish merchant who once shared his Sabbath bread with you. He's gone now, moved to a new settlement for safety. You feel the ground shifting beneath you. So you stop waiting. You plant your fields. You lower your voice. You teach your children caution, because hope, you've learnt, is a dangerous thing in a land with too many futures trying to be born at once. And as the sun sets over your hillside, you wonder not who's right, but who will survive the rightness. And then come the commissions. The British love commissions. Shaw, Hope Simpson, Passfield. They interview everyone, write long reports, and recommend things that will mostly never happen. The mandate becomes a theatre of promises, none of which reach the balcony seats where you sit. But that can wait until the morning mist clears. You stir awake to the distant thump of boots and the rustle of new maps being unrolled in smoky British offices. The year is 1929, and Palestine is no longer just a land of olives and scriptures. It's a pressure cooker with a British manufactured lid, and that lid, it's beginning to rattle. British officials walk through the streets like reluctant chaperones at a wedding between two families that both brought knives. They host tea meetings, they issue declarations, they write reports, but every new measure feels like trying to paint over cracked walls, while the foundation itself is trembling. You hear it first in Jerusalem, a dispute at the Western Wall, sacred to Jews, near the Haram al-Sharif, sacred to Muslims. If there's a better metaphor for the entire conflict, you haven't seen it. Tensions flare, prayers turn into shouts, then stones, then knives, then death. The riots that follow sweep across the land like a sandstorm. In Hebron you hear screams. Longtime neighbours turn against each other. The ancient Jewish community there, centuries old, Arabic speaking, interwoven with local life, is nearly destroyed. Elsewhere, the violence runs in both directions. British soldiers fire into crowds. Panic spreads. The streets are no longer sacred. Historians still argue whether this was spontaneous or incited. What's certain is that the lines that had been smudged between neighbour and outsider, between community and nation, are now written in blood. Coexistence. That dream now lies under a pile of burned homes and shattered glass. The British, of course, respond with what they know best. More commissions. The Shaw Commission, followed by the Hope Simpson report, recommends restricting Jewish immigration and land sales. You almost laugh. The ink is still wet when new immigrants arrive, mostly fleeing Nazi rhetoric, rising like bile in Germany. And here lies the central tragedy you begin to feel in your bones. The worse Europe becomes for Jews, the more inflamed Palestine becomes. Anti-Semitism abroad fuels Jewish arrival, which fuels Arab fears, which then justifies even more Zionist urgency. It's a grim feedback loop, and you're living inside it. Meanwhile, Zionist institutions double down. The Jewish agency grows more assertive. Kibbutzim multiply. Hebrew becomes dominant in education. In Tel Aviv, skyscrapers are dreamed of. In Haifa, Jewish ports buzz with efficiency. It's not just immigration, it's infrastructure, identity, statehood in waiting. Arab society, however, struggles to match the pace. The leadership is fractured. Old families competing for favour from the British, for prestige, for crumbs. A young mufti named Hajj Amin al-Husseini becomes a towering figure, both respected and controversial. He speaks for many, but not all. He seeks independence, but not compromise. He inspires, and he polarizes. In your village, the fear is quiet, but ever present. Prices rise, land becomes scarce. The British build roads, not to connect communities, but to move troops. You pass checkpoints, hear new rules, collect new reasons to be suspicious. Yet life goes on, somehow. A wedding here, a harvest there. You meet a Jewish pharmacist in Haifa who gives your daughter free medicine. A school teacher in Jaffa organizes an Arabic poetry reading. It's not all hatred, but it's all overshadowed. You begin to realize this isn't just about land anymore. It's about legitimacy, about story. Two peoples, each with a history, a trauma, a future they cannot let go. And the British, they hold the pen, but they've stopped writing. They just circle the same paragraph over and over, hoping someone else will finish it. So you walk the streets with quieter steps, watch the horizon with wary eyes. The dream of peace now feels like a luxury, like dessert at a meal where no one remembered to bring food. And the mandate marches on, less a government, more a caretaker of chaos. But that's a tale for tomorrow's sun. You awaken in the dead heat of a 1936 summer, and the air is dense with something more than just dust and cigarette smoke. It's anger, organized, electrified, and ready to explode. The streets no longer whisper, they chant. Palestine is about to scream. This isn't just a riot. This is the Arab revolt. And it's not a passing flare. It's a 3-year uprising that shakes the entire mandate to its bureaucratic knees. You feel it first in the villages. Roadblocks, young men whispering around radios, British patrols twitching at every shadow. The hills are no longer quiet. It starts with a strike. Arabs across Palestine close shops, refuse to pay taxes, boycott British goods. The goal is clear: end Jewish immigration, stop land sales, and push the British to grant independence. At first, it feels united. A movement, a cause, flags wave, speeches stir. You feel strangely hopeful. Then the guns arrive. Guerrilla fighters take to the hills. They sabotage railways, attack British convoys, ambush Zionist settlements. The British respond with collective punishment. Entire villages are fined, searched, sometimes flattened. Curfews descend like curtains. Schools close. Fields burn. It's not war, exactly. It's colonial chaos, and you're caught in the crossfire. The British don't just bring guns. They bring the Peel Commission. Another grand inquiry, another map. This one is different. It proposes partition. A Jewish state here, an Arab one there. Jerusalem internationalized. It's the first time anyone formally suggests splitting the land. Jews are divided. Some accept, some rage. Arabs almost unanimously reject it. Historians still argue whether rejection was tactical or existential. For you, it feels like being offered half a home after the other half was already rented out. It's a compromise written in English, not Arabic. Zionist groups, meanwhile, fortify. The Haganah expands. The Irgun grows bolder, bombing Arab markets in retaliation. The spiral tightens. Tight it becomes tat becomes policy. You watch your neighbours turn into fugitives. Some join the revolt. Others are caught between rebels and soldiers, suspected by both, trusted by neither. You bury a cousin who fell in custody. No one asks how. Then a twist. The British, overwhelmed, underfunded, and facing fascism rising in Europe, shift strategies. They co-opt Zionist help. The Haganah begins low-key cooperating with British intelligence. You wonder, are we still fighting the British? Or are they fighting with some of us against the rest? Leadership fractures. Haj Amin al-Husseini, exiled and increasingly desperate, aligns himself later with Germany, a decision that history and many of his own people will view with deep regret. Your movement loses clarity, coherence, and eventually the will to go on. By 1939, the revolt is crushed. Over 5,000 Arabs killed, tens of thousands imprisoned, leadership in exile or dead, British control stronger than ever. But at a cost, the trust is gone. The mandate now rules by force, not consent. And then comes the White Paper, a British policy that, under pressure from Arab leaders and looming world war, limits Jewish immigration to a trickle, just as Jews in Europe need it most. You feel the ground lurch under you. You wanted limits, but this, it feels cruel even to you. Zionist leaders call it betrayal. Arabs call it too little, too late. The British call it policy. No one calls it peace. In your village, silence returns, but not relief. Homes are rebuilt, graves visited, but something has broken. Not just bodies, beliefs. The dream of independence crushed. the hope of cohabitation, scorched. You tend your garden now, not for tomorrow, but just for tonight. And in the distance, you hear rumors. Germany, Hitler, war, millions of Jews fleeing, some turning toward this land, where the gates are now only half open. You wonder, is this land still yours? Was it ever? But that, my friend, can wait till the stars shift once more. The year is 1941, and you wake up to the low drone of foreign radios whispering news, too awful to fully understand. Europe is devouring itself, and while your own land feels like it's been burning for decades, something even darker now flickers across your horizon. Words like Auschwitz, ghetto, and final solution drift in, hushed and uncertain. You don't yet grasp the scale, but you feel the tremor before the earthquake. In Palestine, the war brings contradictions. British forces are everywhere now, nervously guarding against a German advance through North Africa. Suddenly Jews and Arabs alike are recruited to build roads, dig trenches, supply troops. Some go willingly, others under threat or hunger. You see uniforms where there used to be farmers. You see young men disappear into battles that aren't theirs, for empires that never gave them equality. Yet even as war rages elsewhere, immigration continues, clandestine, urgent, defiant. Zionist groups organize illegal transports, leaky boats with desperate passengers, slipping past British patrols. Many never make it. Some do. You see pale-faced children arrive, silent, staring at orange groves as if they've stepped onto another planet. Tel Aviv becomes a haven, a hive, a heartbreak. Hebrew newspapers mourn the dead in Europe, even as construction cranes rise. Zionist leaders, now speaking with gravity forged in horror, insist that the Jewish state is no longer a dream. It's a necessity, not just for dignity, but for survival. Meanwhile, you sit in your courtyard, watching Arab leaders argue over who's in charge now that the revolt has been crushed. Some try to rebuild political structures, others just wait for the British to leave. Unity is spoken of, but rarely practiced. You feel the weariness in every conversation. Then comes the land question. Again, always, Zionist organizations, especially the Jewish National Fund, continue buying property, sometimes from absentee landlords, sometimes from struggling locals. The math remains unforgiving. Jewish population grows, land available shrinks. Every olive tree becomes a question of sovereignty. You hear stories of forced sales, of tenant evictions, of families packing up generations into donkey carts, but also, paradoxically, of coexistence. Jewish doctors treating Arab patients, Arab workers building Jewish homes. Life doesn't always follow the headlines. Still, tension thickens. In the Galilee, you visit a market and notice new boundaries. Who shops where, who sells to whom, who stopped speaking altogether. These aren't formal laws, they're emotional walls, invisible but weighty, and every now and then someone punches through with a knife, or a stone, or a slogan. Zionist militias are reorganizing. The Haganah becomes more disciplined, better armed. The Irgun grows bolder. A splinter group, Lehi, also known as the Stern Gang, emerges with a manifesto that sounds like poetry dipped in TNT. They begin targeting British officers, and you realize this isn't just Jews versus Arabs anymore. It's Jews versus British, sometimes Jews versus Jews. The puzzle keeps gaining new edges. The British, they look tired. London is bombing rubble. India is demanding independence. Palestine has become more burden than jewel. Still they cling, issue more permits, more restrictions, build fences, publish white papers with the same comforting vagueness. We understand your concerns. No one believes them anymore. Then comes the end of the war. Europe is ash. 6 million Jews dead. And the survivors? Many of them now look east to here, to this hot, crowded, conflicted strip of land where an ancient dream now demands space. You watch as ships arrive, as barbed wire camps are set up for Jews, this time by the British, on Cyprus. You wonder how history manages to repeat itself with such lazy efficiency. Zionist lobbying intensifies. In Washington, in London, the word state is used openly now. No more metaphors, no more ambiguity. You feel the pressure like a desert wind, dry, constant, and impossible to ignore. And amidst all this, your village still tends its sheep, still argues over dowries, still watches the sun rise over a land that's no longer yours alone. You think of coexistence, of neighbours who once brought figs in spring, and you wonder, were we fools to believe we could share this place? But that reflection can wait until the sky darkens again. You wake up to tension thick enough to slice with a knife, and someone, somewhere, probably already has. It's 1946, and Palestine is not so much a territory as a ticking clock. You feel it in the silence of early mornings, the way conversations drop when someone enters the room, the way every wall now seems to listen. The British, bless them, are out of ideas. After years of reports, commissions and contradictions, they're finally realizing what everyone else knew in 1920. This is not going to end with a strongly worded memo. Their soldiers patrol nervously, targeted now not just by Arab rebels, but by Zionist fighters who used to be their allies. The mandate, once an imperial trophy, now feels like a burden with a bomb attached. The Ergen and Leahy step up their campaign. Attacks on railways, ambushes, assassinations. Then the King David hotel bombing, July, a towering stone building in Jerusalem, home to the British administrative offices, torn apart by explosives hidden in milk churns, 91 dead. The Ergen claims the British were warned. The British say otherwise. Historians still argue whether it was a necessary strike or a brutal act of terrorism. You just heard the blast echo across the valley and wondered how much worse this can get. But the Haganah, the more official Zionist militia, tries to maintain a moral high ground. Well, mostly. They still carry arms, still plan operations, still drill under cover of darkness. You pass a field one night and swear you saw a dozen young men disappear into the shadows, speaking Hebrew too fast to follow. On the Arab side, the leadership remains fractured. Haj Amin al-Husseini is in exile, stained by his wartime flirtation with Nazi Germany. Local Arab parties squabble, peasant voices are unheard, and so resistance continues in bursts, sporadic violence, spontaneous riots, frustration boiling over like tea left too long on the fire. And then behind all of this, there's the refugee crisis. Europe's Jews, survivors of camps and death marches, now float in ships off Palestine's coast. They are stateless, exhausted, and determined. The British block them, send them back, even detain them in Cyprus. But each ship denied becomes another moral scar, another headline, another reason why the Zionist cause gains sympathy abroad. You see a pattern forming. As British legitimacy crumbles, Zionist organization hardens. They have a government in waiting, a military, schools, currency, even a flag, though unofficial. Arabs, meanwhile, have numbers, but no central command, no international allies, no unified plan, just a shared dread of what's coming. And then there's the land, always the land. In cities like Haifa and Jaffa, tensions run high as Jewish immigrants rent new apartments and Arab families worry that they're being pushed out, not by force, but by momentum. In the countryside, Jewish settlements expand in quiet defiance of British restrictions. It's legal if you squint, and if you don't squint, well, there's always the protection of the Haganah. You see neighborhoods dividing, cafes that once hosted mixed patrons now serve separate worlds. Streets once shared now belong to separate patrols. There's a sense unspoken but understood that the era of ambiguity is ending. Lines are being drawn, even if no one wants to admit it yet. Then come the rumours. The British might leave. Just pack up and go. A rumour at first. then a leak, then a fact. They're going to hand this whole mess over to the United Nations, that newborn institution that everyone hopes will somehow do better. But better in whose eyes? You sit on your roof, the Mediterranean breeze ruffling your hair, and you wonder how many dreams can share the same house before someone moves out or is thrown out. The night brings little comfort. The stars are the same ones Abraham saw, but the land beneath them is now burning with too many promises, too few truths. And the explosion, it's no longer a question of if, but when. But until then, rest. You'll need the strength. You don't sleep much these nights. The wind whispers new maps. People speak in half sentences, like they're saving breath for the next crisis. And then, one evening in late 1947, the whisper becomes a roar. The United Nations has voted. Partition. 2 states. 1 land. Congratulations. You're now part of an international experiment in peaceful division. Just don't ask where your house falls on the map. You hear the news from a scratchy radio in the coffee house, the words bouncing off the walls like startled birds. A Jewish state, an Arab state, Jerusalem under international control. A vote passed by a fragile majority of world powers, some voting out of guilt, others out of politics, most out of exhaustion. You look around the room, wondering who's smiling. No one is. For Zionists, it's a bittersweet victory. The borders are weird, thin, disconnected, hard to defend. But it's legal. It's recognition. It's hope. People dance in Tel Aviv. Candies are thrown. The state is real, they whisper. And for the first time, they're not wrong. For Arabs, the reaction is simpler. Fury. This isn't compromise. It's theft with international paperwork. How can half the land go to people who make up 1/3 of the population and own less than 10% of the land? Your neighbours don't see a map. They see betrayal wrapped in blue and white. Historians still argue whether the rejection of the plan by Arab leaders was strategic or emotional. You feel it as both. Strategic because the plan felt like an insult. Emotional because every inch of this land holds your family's blood, your grandmother's olives, your children's future. Tensions explode almost instantly. The partition isn't implemented. It's ignored, weaponized. Arab militias attack Jewish convoys. Ergun retaliates. Haganah mobilizes. You witness the unraveling of everything that was still holding together by habit, not trust. Cities become war zones. In Haifa, you watch terrified Arab families flee down to the port, boarding ships they hope will take them somewhere safe, anywhere but here. In Jerusalem, the roads to the Jewish quarter are cut off, supplies run low, snipers nest in minarets and rooftops. Streets you walked your whole life are now firing lanes. You see things that don't make sense. A Jewish bakery bombed, an Arab wedding raided. Rumours of massacres swirl, some true, some embellished, all terrifying. Fear distorts everything. You stop going to the market. You start sleeping with one ear open. You consider digging a hiding spot under the stairs. Zionist leaders pivot rapidly. They launch Plan Dalet, a strategy that aims to secure Jewish territories and clear hostile villages along key routes. Some say it's a defensive necessity. Others call it ethnic cleansing. Either way, it's implemented with cold efficiency. You hear of Deir Yassin, a village near Jerusalem attacked by Ergun and Lehi fighters. Over 100 Arab civilians killed, including women and children. The details are contested. Numbers, context. But the result is not. Fear spreads like a virus. Villagers flee before the trucks even arrive. And so begins the Nakba, the catastrophe. Over 700,000 Palestinians flee or are expelled. Some leave fearing massacres. Others are driven out at gunpoint. Still others are convinced by British officials to evacuate temporarily. None imagine they won't return. But you stay. For now. You watch the fields empty. You walk through abandoned homes. You hear new accents in old towns. You feel history shifting, not with declarations, but with footsteps leaving and entering, all without your consent. The British, they're packing. By May 1948, they're gone. No ceremony, no solutions. Just ships sailing off into irrelevance, leaving behind two peoples, one land, and enough bitterness to salt every remaining crop. And in the final days of the mandate, as Jewish leaders prepare to declare independence, you stare at a land torn in half and ask the only question that matters: what happens to the people who no longer have a place? But the answer waits for the next sunrise, stained in smoke. You barely recognize the land beneath your feet. The air smells like fire and finality. It's May 14th, 1948, and a voice crackles through a radio in Tel Aviv. David Ben-Gurion, with the gravity of a prophet and the timing of a man who knows the British are leaving in 6 hours, declares the birth of the State of Israel. Just like that. No more mandate, no more maybe. It's a state now. Flags are raised, tears are shed, and outside, armies are mobilizing. You don't hear cheering where you are. You hear marching. 5 Arab nations, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon, declare war, not just on Israel, but on the idea that this land could be carved without consent. You wonder what war between nations will do to the tiny village nearby, where the loudest sound used to be a rooster with identity issues. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War begins not with a bang, but with confusion. Armies advance, then halt. Jewish militias fuse into the new Israel Defense Forces, IDF. Arab liberation armies stumble through terrain they've barely mapped. Skirmishes explode along every edge of the new state, and civilians, always the most expendable assets, flee in waves. This is when the Nakba becomes more than a word. It becomes your neighbor, leaving with only a satchel. It becomes roadblocks, where farmers once traded olives. It becomes entire villages, hundreds of them emptied, some blown up to prevent return. Lida, Ramleh, Tantura, each becomes a story wrapped in silence or shame, depending on who you ask. Historians still argue whether the expulsions were systematic or chaotic, premeditated or improvised. You don't need an academic debate. You saw the trucks. You saw the fear. You saw keys clutched by people who thought they'd be back in a week. For those who stayed, some 150,000 Arabs within the new Israel, the future is complex. You are now a citizen, technically, but under military rule, restricted movement, curfews. You're part of a state that does not yet know what to do with you, except watch you carefully. And what of the Arab armies? They fought, they bled, and they lost. The war ends in 1949 with a series of armistices. No peace treaties, just lines, green ones they call them, drawn across a confused map. Israel gains more territory than the UN had allotted. Jordan takes the West Bank. Egypt holds Gaza. Palestine, as a political entity, vanishes from the paperwork. In Tel Aviv, they celebrate. In Damascus, they mourn. In your town, you count the missing and wonder how a country could be born in the same hour your cousin disappeared. And still you rebuild. The fields don't stop needing tilling. Children still grow, even in ruins. But now your identity has hardened. You're not just from Palestine, you're Palestinian. The word was always there, but now it carries pain, memory, and a strange new pride. And the refugees, those in camps in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, they don't forget. They teach their children names of villages erased from the map. They show rusted keys and say, one day we will return. It's not just nostalgia, it's geography turned to grief. Meanwhile, Israel begins absorbing Jewish refugees, Holocaust survivors, Yemenite Jews airlifted under Operation Magic Carpet, Mizrahim from Arab lands facing their own expulsions. They arrive shell-shocked and determined. New towns rise, old fears remain, and Palestinians, they become invisible to many of them, ghosts in a dream they were told was empty. You walk the same hills, but the names have changed, some erased, some Hebraized. Signs in Hebrew mark places your grandfather knew only by Arabic. You speak of your home in the past tense, but live as though it might return. You no longer trust maps, you only trust memory. And as the dust settles, for now, you close your eyes, knowing this wasn't the end of war, just the first pause in a very long sentence. It's 1950, and the smoke has cleared mostly, but the silence left behind rings louder than the bullets ever did. You're still here somehow, but nothing else is. Your town is smaller, your family is scattered, your identity, now a geopolitical category. Refugee, citizen, Arab, Israeli, displaced person. Choose one, none of them fit. Israel is consolidating now. It's not just a military force anymore. It's a government, a passport, a bureaucracy. New laws take shape. One of the first, the absentee property law. It sounds benign, almost boring. It says, if you weren't physically in your home during the war, that property now belongs to the state. Guess what? Most of your neighbors weren't. They were fleeing, hiding, or burying the dead. So their homes, entire villages, are now absentee property. You call it loss. The new state calls it legal. Meanwhile, Israel opens its doors to Jews worldwide. Holocaust survivors, Iraqi Jews fleeing pogroms, North African communities driven out in retaliation for the 1948 war. They arrive in waves. Some settle in former Palestinian villages, renamed, repainted, reimagined. You watch them try to build lives from trauma. You don't blame them, but you can't help but feel replaced. Inside Israel, Palestinians, those who remained live under military rule, curfews, travel permits, surveillance. You can vote in theory. In practice, you vote for approved parties. You can speak, just not too loudly. Historians still argue whether this period was one of pragmatic security or quiet suppression. You just call it survival. In the West Bank and Gaza, ruled now by Jordan and Egypt respectively, Palestinians regroup. Some focus on education, others on agriculture. Some stew in frustration. Camps grow, not just in size, but in permanence. Tents give way to cinder blocks. The word temporary becomes a cruel joke. You see something new rise in these years, a politics of memory. Poetry becomes resistance. Mahmoud Darwish writes verses that sound like lullabies and land deeds at the same time. Nakba Day is commemorated quietly, then loudly. Your identity stops being regional, no longer just Nablusi or Gazan. It becomes national. You are Palestinian. That word now means exile, resistance, and stubbornness. Across the border, Arab regimes fumble. Pan-Arabism becomes the new rallying cry. Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser talks of unity, strength, confronting Israel. His voice booms across radios, calling for dignity and confrontation. You want to believe him, you really do, but you've heard a lot of speeches by now. The world, meanwhile, moves on. The Cold War heats up. The US and USSR stare at each other across nuclear silos, while funding rival sides in the Middle East. Palestine becomes a pawn, useful when needed, ignored when not. And then there's the economy. Israel grows fast. It builds roads, universities, factories. Jewish immigrants are housed, educated and trained. Palestinian towns, by contrast, lag behind. You watch new highways bypass your village. New textbooks ignore your history. A new narrative forms. The land was barren, the people absent, the state a miracle. You want to scream, but who would listen? So you work, quietly. You rebuild what you can. You tell your children stories of orange groves and jasmine gardens. You speak of return, not as politics, but as bedtime comfort. A story, but one that tastes real on the tongue. And through it all, you wait, you watch, you wonder, how long can a people live between memory and border, between a vanished past and an impossible future? The answer, you suppose, is longer than anyone expects. But for now, rest. There are more battles coming. It's June 1967, and you're staring at the sky because the ground no longer makes sense. In just 6 days, less than a week of breathless panic, radio static and blinding dust, everything changes. Again, the war comes suddenly, but its echoes stretch forever. You've heard the build-up for weeks. Nasser closing the Straits of Tiran, Jordan signing a pact with Egypt, Syrian artillery shelling northern Israel. The air smells like anticipation and kerosene. Then, on June 5, Israel launches a preemptive strike. In one morning, most of Egypt's air force is turned into scrap metal. By the time you realize a war has started, it's nearly over. 6 days. That's all it takes for Israel to take the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. It's not a war, it's a landslide. You wake up surrounded by one country and go to bed in another. For some, it's a miracle. For you, it's a recurring nightmare with new maps. Jerusalem is reunified, but not really. Israeli flags fly over the old city. The Western Wall is open to Jewish prayer. Arabs are given access to Al-Aqsa under surveillance. You walk its cobblestones with reverence, but also a tightness in your chest. Who owns this holiness now? In the West Bank, welcome to military occupation. There are new checkpoints, new orders, curfews, soldiers with rifles, in towns that once had only shepherds and weddings. You're not annexed, you're administered, a word that sounds like it belongs to paperwork, not people. Historians still argue whether the occupation was supposed to be temporary or a strategic buffer that became permanent by inertia. You know only that your village now answers to a military governor, and every decision from building a house to planting a tree requires a permit you may never get. But it's not just about soldiers and fences, it's about settlements. Almost immediately, Israeli civilians begin moving into the newly occupied territories. At first, small, ideological, later, large, strategic, subsidized. They call it return, you call it encroachment. Olive trees are uprooted, roads are built that you can't drive on. Neighbors move not just across town, but into exile. In Gaza, the occupation is harsher. A tight strip of land overflowing with refugees now gains checkpoints, restricted fishing zones, curfews. You hear of entire neighborhoods under lockdown. You hear of boys arrested for graffiti. Palestinians everywhere respond in different ways. Some protest, others organize. Intellectuals write. Young people whisper about resistance. The PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, takes center stage, led by a man with a keffiyeh and a voice like gravel, Yasser Arafat. From exile, they declare a fight for liberation, for return, for recognition. Whether you agree or not, their flag now flutters at protests, funerals, and football matches. Meanwhile, Arab regimes reel. Nasser resigns, then returns, pressured by public grief. Jordan mourns East Jerusalem. Syria simmers in defeat, and the world, it watches with fascination. Israel, once David, now looks more like Goliath. But in its own story, it's still both. And amidst this tectonic shift, you try to live. Your son needs school books. Your cousin wants to marry. Your roof still leaks. Life does not pause for politics. Yet you feel the difference. Conversations are sharper. Hope is scarcer. Every map you see contradicts the one in your heart. Still, there's a kind of clarity. For the first time, all Palestinians are under one authority, or rather, one occupation. Your identity solidifies not in freedom, but in shared restriction. You walk through your town and see it, the resilience in the faces, the quiet defiance in every gesture, every preserved story, every stubborn fig tree. And you wonder how long can people be occupied before they simply refuse. But for now, the sun sets, and you let yourself believe that the night may still hold a dream. It's the late 1970s now, and the taste in your mouth is one part dust, one part déjà vu. Everything changes, yet somehow everything stays the same. You watch as the occupation settles into routine, as if it were just another government office, except with tanks. The checkpoints aren't temporary anymore. The watchtowers aren't provisional. And your patience, it's thinning like paint on a protest sign. But then, unexpectedly, something shifts, far away, yet unavoidably close. Egypt makes peace with Israel. Yes, Egypt. The mighty Nasser's Egypt. Well, not Nasser anymore. He's gone. Now it's Anwar Sadat, bold and mustached, who flies to Jerusalem in 1977, shaking hands in Hebrew-accented English. In 1979, under US choreography, he signs the Camp David Accords with Israel's Menachem Begin, and Jimmy Carter looking on like a nervous wedding planner. Historians still argue whether Egypt's move was betrayal or realism. You feel it as abandonment. The first Arab country to make peace with Israel does so without even mentioning the word Palestine in any enforceable way. You're a clause in a footnote of someone else's treaty. Again, the Arab world reacts predictably. Outrage, boycotts, Sadat's eventual assassination. But beneath the fury lies fatigue. You sense it. The Arab cause, so often tied to your fate, is unraveling. Everyone has their own crises now. Civil wars, coups, oil politics. You're left clutching your own narrative, hoping someone still reads it. Meanwhile, in the West Bank and Gaza, something quieter but deeper is fermenting. A generation born under occupation, never having known anything else, begins to think differently. They stop waiting for Arab armies. They stop sending petitions to British archives. They start looking inward, and sometimes toward stones. Settlements expand. What began as scattered outposts now become towns with paved roads, schools, even shopping centres, built on hills, always hills. You suspect the altitude is strategic, not scenic. These aren't rogue ideologues anymore. They're supported, guarded, financed. You watch bulldozers level terraces where your grandfather planted thyme. You still work the land, if you're lucky enough to still have some. But water is scarcer now, permits harder to get. Your cousin applies to build a house. He's told no. A settler nearby builds a swimming pool. You smile, but it doesn't reach your eyes. In 1982, Israel invades Lebanon. The aim is to expel the PLO from their base in Beirut, where they've set up a kind of government in exile. For weeks you listen to reports of bombardments, sieges, evacuations. Eventually Arafat and his fighters leave, boarded onto ships like pirates of some lost republic. They're exiled to Tunisia, and your hope follows them. Back home you notice something strange. No one's in charge, but everyone's watching. Israeli soldiers control the roads. Palestinian families control the stories. Everything else is improvisation. Teachers risk arrest for teaching Palestinian history. Children draw flags on classroom walls. The occupation becomes more than a structure. It becomes a language, a psychology, a weather system. You visit Jerusalem and see contrasts so sharp they sting. Luxury hotels beside refugee camps. Tourists taking selfies near Al-Aqsa, while grandmothers wait 2 hours at checkpoints to visit family. The tension isn't just political, it's architectural. Still, you live, you marry, you bury, you explain to your children why they can't go to the sea, even though it's only 30 minutes away. You show them where the border used to be. You tell them where you're from, even if that place now has a Hebrew name and a highway running through it. And somewhere in your chest, something smoulders. Not just grief, not just rage, but resolve. You feel it in the quiet way people repair homes that might be demolished, in the songs sung at weddings, in the poetry scribbled on concrete walls. You've been erased from so many documents, but you're still here, still writing, and the page turns again. It's December 1987, and it begins not with tanks, not with a speech, but with a traffic accident. A truck crashes into a line of Palestinian workers in Gaza. 4 dead. Rumors swirl. It wasn't an accident. It was revenge. Whether it's true or not, you already know the truth people feel, and in that truth something long simmering breaks the surface. The Intifada begins. You feel it before the word reaches the newspapers. A surge of energy, graffiti spreads faster than curfews. Children throw stones at soldiers with slingshots older than their uncles. Tires burn at checkpoints. Boycotts erupt of Israeli products, of Israeli institutions, of the very normalcy that's been forced upon you for 2 decades. The air tastes like defiance and old tea. The first Intifada isn't led by generals. It's led by students, mothers, labourers. Committees form in neighbourhoods. Schools teach underground. Doctors treat patients in living rooms. This is not war. This is rebellion, as rhythm, resistance, as routine. Israel responds with what it knows: military force, batons, bullets, curfews, mass arrests. You see neighbours disappear for weeks. You hear the phrase broken bones policy and wonder when that became official policy. Some soldiers refuse orders. Others carry them out with dead-eyed efficiency. Historians still argue whether the uprising was spontaneous or orchestrated by the PLO from abroad. You know it wasn't Arafat's idea. He's still in Tunisia, giving interviews and fundraising. The real architects are women blocking roads, teenagers blocking tanks with nothing but sneakers and sheer nerve. But eventually the PLO steps in. They can't afford not to. In 1988, in a dramatic about-face, they officially recognize Israel's right to exist and declare an independent Palestinian state. It's a strange declaration made in exile, without land, without borders, without army. But still, the word Palestine is printed on letterheads now. That matters. The world begins to pay attention. CNN covers the stone-throwing children. Western audiences see the occupation, many for the first time, not through Cold War lenses, but through human eyes. South Africa draws parallels. So do Irish nationalists. So does your aunt, who's never been political, but now attends every protest with a pot and a spoon. Inside Israel, society is split. Some argue the occupation is unsustainable, immoral. Others double down. Settlements increase, not decrease. By 1990, there are over 100,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank and Gaza. Many believe they're fulfilling a biblical promise. Others just want cheap housing with a nice view. You attend funerals, too many. Some for neighbours shot in protests. Some for collaborators assassinated by Palestinians themselves. The uprising is raw and righteous, but also chaotic and at times cruel. Families turn inward. Trust fractures. Still, the stone remains the symbol, not because it's effective, but because it's defiant. Because it says, I have nothing, and yet I resist. And then, halfway around the world, Iraq invades Kuwait. Suddenly, your story is pushed off the front pages. The world has a new crisis. Again, you watch as regional alliances realign. The PLO sides with Saddam Hussein. Many Palestinians support him, not out of love, but out of spite. The enemy of my occupier is complicated. This gamble costs dearly. Gulf countries expel hundreds of thousands of Palestinian workers. The PLO loses funding, credibility, leverage. You feel the ground shift under your bare feet. But the Intifada continues, less dramatic now, more institutional. Civil resistance becomes habit. Boycotts become economics. Children grow up fast, then faster. And you learn to breathe between curfews, to plant trees near barbed wire, to say freedom like it's a fact, not a forecast. You still have no passport, no army, no embassy, but you have a flag, a voice, a rhythm that even bullets haven't broken. The uprising hasn't ended, it's just changing tempo. And as the sun drops behind the hills, you whisper to your children, we rise even when we're not seen. Section 17. It's September 1993, and you find yourself blinking at a television screen where Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin are shaking hands on the White House lawn, coaxed together by Bill Clinton's outstretched arms and diplomatic grin. Behind them a cluster of suits claps with the enthusiasm of people who think they've fixed something. You want to believe it too. You almost do. The Oslo Accords, they call it. A milestone, a breakthrough, a roadmap, if you're feeling optimistic. For the first time, the PLO and Israel officially recognize each other. Arafat renounces terrorism. Rabin acknowledges the PLO as a legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. Two bitter enemies trying to speak through clenched teeth. Historians still argue whether Oslo was a genuine step toward peace or a masterclass in ambiguity. The documents are vague, the timelines blurry, the promises uneven. You scan the fine print: Palestinian Authority to be created, self-rule in Gaza, and parts of the West Bank. Final status issues deferred. You sigh. Deferred is just another word for postponed heartbreak. Still, the mood shifts. Arafat returns to Gaza in 1994. For many, it's like watching a ghost materialize. Children wave flags, old men cry, women bake sweets. The exiled father of the cause is home, sort of. His motorcade moves through streets lined with both joy and skepticism. The Palestinian Authority sets up shop. Government buildings appear, ministries, ID cards, police forces with shiny new uniforms. You get a sense of order, or at least a performance of it. There's a flag now flown from rooftops and above schools. You touch its cloth like it's sacred, because for once it's yours. But cracks form quickly. The authority becomes heavy with bureaucracy and whispers of corruption. Arafat's circle grows insular. Opposition voices are silenced, not with jail, but with obscurity. Elections are promised, then delayed. Power settles into old hands. Israel, for its part, withdraws from parts of Gaza and Jericho. But settlements, they expand. Not pause, not freeze, expand. Roads for settlers snake deeper into the West Bank. Bypass roads, they call them, to avoid Palestinian towns. You call them lines drawn with asphalt and intention. Then, in 1995, Rabin is assassinated by an Israeli extremist who opposed the peace process. Hope flickers. His successor, Shimon Peres, tries to keep the momentum, but by 1996 he's replaced by Benjamin Netanyahu, who opposes Oslo in practice, if not in speeches. The peace process slows, then limps. And Palestinians. You're caught in limbo. You now have a president, but not a country. A police force, but not sovereignty. Your ID says Palestinian Authority, but your freedom still depends on Israeli checkpoints, Israeli permits, Israeli moods. You try to live normally. You open a shop, send your daughter to a new school, pray that the next round of negotiations will bring something tangible. But every time hope rises, so does a new wave of violence, or a demolition, or a delay. You begin to feel like Oslo was a photograph, not a bridge, a captured moment of possibility that never turned into structure. You remember the handshake, you remember the flags, but the reality, still settlements, still occupation, still exile. In Gaza, things grow tense. Hamas, once a fringe movement born during the First Intifada, gains popularity. They reject Oslo. They accuse the authority of selling out. They start winning hearts and elections. You see posters, slogans, angry debates at mosques and markets. You realize something has shifted. It's no longer just about Palestinians versus Israelis. It's also about Palestinians versus Palestinians, visions versus visions. The unity forged in oppression begins to unravel in administration. And yet you still dream. You pass a mural of a dove holding an olive branch and wonder, is it tired too? But that, perhaps, is tomorrow's burden. It's the year 2000, and everything seems oddly still. like the moment before a storm breaks the sky open. You sense it in the markets, in the mosques, even in the pauses between sentences. Oslo is now less an agreement and more a ghost. It haunts every conversation. You hear people say things like, "back when we believed in peace," and wonder if they mean last year or a lifetime ago. And then it happens. One visit, one spark. Ariel Sharon, flanked by a convoy of Israeli police, walks into the Al-Aqsa compound. It's framed as a visit, a gesture, a political move. But to many Palestinians, it's a provocation, a desecration, a red line crossed. You hear shouting, then gunfire, then the word you've been waiting for, intifada. The second intifada isn't like the first. There are no stones this time, or not just stones. There are guns, bombs, suicide belts. The rage is deeper, the tactics bloodier. You watch footage of a child, Mohammed al-Dura, caught in the crossfire, cowering with his father. The image spreads like wildfire, and nothing after that feels the same. Historians still argue whether the uprising was orchestrated or inevitable. You just know it feels different this time. Raw, personal, desperate. No committees, no underground schools, just fury and fire. Israel responds with overwhelming force. Helicopters circle above cities. Tanks roll through refugee camps. You hear about targeted assassinations, house demolitions, curfews that stretch for weeks. You watch cities like Nablus and Jenin transform into war zones. The death toll climbs on both sides. And in the midst of this, something massive begins to rise. A wall. They call it a security barrier. You call it a cage. Concrete slabs, as tall as apartment buildings, slice through villages, separating families from schools, farmers from fields, lovers from Friday afternoons. The route doesn't follow the 1967 lines. It cuts deeper, encircles settlements, redefines reality. You try to protest, but the wall grows anyway. In 2002, Israel reoccupies most of the West Bank in what it calls Operation Defensive Shield. Entire cities are placed under siege. The Palestinian Authority's institutions, such as they were, are bombed. Arafat himself is confined to his Ramallah compound, encircled by tanks, reduced from president to prisoner in his own office. Yet the violence continues. On buses in Tel Aviv, in cafes in Haifa, at military checkpoints, and in crowded marketplaces. The Intifada devours any chance for dialogue, and with every bomb, every funeral, every broken truce, the idea of peace slips further into folklore. Then, in 2004, Arafat dies. Whether from illness or intrigue, historians will debate that too. His passing marks the end of an era. You remember his speeches, his uniform, his awkward diplomacy. Love him or loathe him, he was your symbol. Now he's gone, and you're left with silence and succession battles. Mahmoud Abbas takes over, moderate, soft-spoken, cautious. He opposes violence, praises diplomacy, pleads for calm. The world nods politely, but the facts on the ground remain unchanged. The occupation continues. The wall extends. Settlements grow. And then 2005, Israel disengages from Gaza. It sounds hopeful. It looks chaotic. Jewish settlers are evicted, some dragged out kicking and weeping. Gaza is left without settlements, but also without sovereignty. No airport, no control of borders, no economy to speak of. You watch it all unfold from the West Bank and wonder, is this a step forward or just a change in the scenery? By now, the world barely notices your headlines unless something explodes. You've become background noise to global politics, an unresolved footnote between oil prices and US elections. You wave your flag, but fewer cameras turn toward it. And yet, life continues. Always. You go to weddings. You fix the roof. You mourn and celebrate, sometimes in the same hour, because this is still your home, even if it no longer feels like it belongs to you. And one night, As the call to prayer rises above the roar of distant tanks, you ask yourself, can peace survive if no one believes in it anymore? But the answer perhaps lies in the next sunrise. It's January 2006, and the ballots are open, not just in theory, but in plastic boxes guarded by hopeful teenagers and grumpy old men. Palestinians go to vote in parliamentary elections, many for the first time in years. And the outcome? Not what anyone expected. Hamas wins, not by a little, by a landslide. You hear it on the news, in the streets, in the stunned silence of Palestinian Authority officials. The movement that had once operated in the shadows, that rejected Oslo, that had no suits or cigars or official stamps, now governs. Fatah, long the face of the struggle, is now the face of defeat. Hamas frames it as justice, a reward for years of resistance and social programs. Fatah calls it a disaster. Israel calls it terrorism in a necktie. The international community collectively panics, and suddenly democracy doesn't look quite so charming. Aid is cut, sanctions imposed, pressure mounts. Historians still argue whether Hamas's rise was a protest vote or a tectonic shift. You feel it as both. Tensions grow quickly. The Palestinian territories, already sliced geographically, now fracture politically. Gaza becomes Hamas land. The West Bank stays under Fatah's administration. The unity government idea flickers briefly, then dies in a gunfight. In 2007, Hamas seizes control of Gaza in a violent, fast, bloody takeover. Offices are stormed, rivals executed. The territory, once chaotic, is now definitively under one rule, but not under peace. Israel responds by imposing a blockade, and Egypt joins. Gaza becomes a prison, hemmed in by walls, watched by drones, governed by defiance. And then come the wars, 2008, 2012, 2014. Operation names like Cast Lead and Protective Edge make them sound clinical, like weather patterns. But you live through them. Airstrikes rain down on densely packed neighborhoods. Rockets fly toward Israeli towns. Civilian casualties mount on both sides. You watch a hospital bombed on live TV. You see a child pulled from rubble, covered in ash, eyes too wide for a 5-year-old. You hear sirens in Tel Aviv, see bomb shelters opened in Sderot. No one is spared, especially not the innocent. By now, the cycle is familiar. Provocation, retaliation, ceasefire, repeat. You know when to stock food, when to keep the children indoors, when to turn off the TV, and just listen to the wind instead. And in the West Bank, the occupation deepens. Settlements grow ever more entrenched. Outposts become towns. Checkpoints become permanent. The Israeli war loops and curls like a snake with zoning privileges. Permits are denied. Homes demolished. Sometimes even when legal. You shrug. There's no such thing as consistent law. In a place where two systems operate side by side, one for settlers, one for you. You hear talk of a two-state solution. Still, politicians mention it like a spell that lost its magic, but still sounds nice. Yet every map you see looks less like two states, and more like a sponge. Perforated, leaking, unsustainable. Palestinians begin to whisper the word apartheid. Some say it openly. Israeli critics say it too. Others bristle. The debate grows louder abroad than it does at home, where people are too busy surviving to argue semantics. And so you endure. You adapt. You update your vocabulary. Ceasefire means 3 days of relative quiet. Peace talks mean press photos and nothing else. Security means drones overhead. Resistance means more funerals. You take your daughter to school through a checkpoint. You grow tomatoes in pots because the land is shrinking. You learn to explain occupation in bedtime stories, using metaphors that don't scare children. Once upon a time we lived freely, and still hope flares in odd places. Young people start blogging. Musicians release tracks from studios built in garages. You see Palestinian flags at global protests. You hear solidarity in languages you don't speak. Because the story hasn't ended, it just refuses to wrap up neatly. And tonight, as another ceasefire holds for now, you let yourself sleep, because tomorrow might ask more of you than today. It's the early 2020s, and you're living in an era that doesn't feel like one. Time blurs. Days melt together under the weight of repetition. But every so often, something snaps you into full alertness. A drone overhead, a protest turned viral, a voice cracking through the static of global fatigue. In Gaza, things have only worsened. The blockade still squeezes life into a sliver of endurance. Electricity comes in hours, not days. Water tastes like rust. Unemployment crushes spirits before they graduate. And yet, weddings still happen. Children still play. Even laughter persists, sharp and defiant like a kite in a storm. In 2021, tension in East Jerusalem ignites again. Sheikh Jarrah, a quiet neighborhood turned global hashtag. Palestinian families face eviction. Legal battles trace back to documents from empires long dissolved. You hear neighbors talk of court dates like they're going into battle, and then Al-Aqsa is stormed again, prayers interrupted by tear gas and stun grenades. It spreads. Quickly, rockets from Gaza, airstrikes from Israel, 11 days of war that feel like a looped trauma. Again, buildings fall. Again, civilians die. Again, the world watches, tweets, moves on. Historians won't need to argue whether this was spontaneous or planned. It was both. It was the consequence of every unresolved chapter before it. And then, a new term enters your life. Abraham Accords. The United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, Arab nations begin normalizing ties with Israel. Embassies open, flights resume, trade flourishes, and Palestine, you are mentioned politely, tucked in at the end of joint statements, like an aging relative no one wants to offend. You walk the same roads, but they feel lonelier. Arab solidarity now comes with disclaimers and stock portfolios. You understand the realpolitik of it, but you still feel like a bride left at the altar. In the West Bank, the occupation continues. Silent, steady, bureaucratic, new outposts pop up, IDs are still color-coded. Your access to land, jobs, and justice still depends on a military permit or a sympathetic clerk. Some days you forget what freedom would even feel like. Mahmoud Abbas still governs, or rather, occupies a chair. Elections are postponed, then cancelled. Dissent is labelled sedition. Younger Palestinians grow cynical. Some look to resistance, others to exile, many to their screens. And yet, you see new forms of fight. TikTok videos mocking checkpoints. Art installations in refugee camps. Digital protests that echo across continents. You smile at a mural that reads, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." There's no peace process anymore. Just a process. Meetings about meetings. International delegations. Snapping photos. With bored translators. And every year another UN resolution that changes nothing except how thick the paperwork stack becomes. And still, you live. You grow older. You teach your grandchildren. Words your parents whispered to you. Sumud, steadfastness. You show them olive trees and say, "These are our monuments." You point to the hills and say, "That's where we're from," even if that hill is now a settlement with a different name. And as night falls, as it always does, you wonder if they'll see freedom, if the story will ever have a sunrise, instead of just a long twilight. But for now, the stars are still above you, constant, quiet, and you sleep beneath them, knowing the next chapter will wait until morning. It's the mid-2020s now, and you're floating in that strange space between history and headlines. Everything feels like it's happening all at once, and also like nothing ever changes. Your phone buzzes with updates, another raid in Jenin, Another resolution at the UN, another thread of rage unraveling on social media. And yet, outside your window, the olive trees still sway, stubborn and serene. In Gaza, the blockade has become generational. Children born after 2007 have never left. They speak of the sea as if it were a myth. Electricity flickers like mood lighting. 2 hours here, 4 hours there. You hear stories of tech-savvy teenagers building apps in Rafah and launching them to markets they can't physically reach. Hope, it seems, has decent Wi-Fi. The West Bank isn't much freer. The checkpoints still stretch across hills like scars. The roads divide, the settlements expand, and the permits, those eternal paper gatekeepers, still determine the rhythm of your life. And yet, life continues. In Ramallah, cafes are full. In Hebron, shops open each morning, even if they close early. Weddings are still loud, and grief is still shared with trays of sweet tea and verses of poetry. In East Jerusalem, tensions never really sleep. You hear about evictions, demolitions, prayers interrupted. The old city breathes unevenly, like a chest half full of air. The dome of the rock still gleams under sun and drone alike, but the ground it stands on remains contested, a symbol and a stage. And in Israel, debates rage. Some call for annexation, others for reform. A generation of young Israelis grows up knowing only the occupation as background noise. Some question it, others justify it. But you sense a shift, subtle but real. More voices, Jewish and Arab, saying out loud what used to be whispered, that peace built on inequality is no peace at all. Abroad, solidarity movements swell and fracture. Flags wave at protests in London, New York, Cape Town. But the headlines fade quickly. Attention spans shrink. You watch as your story competes with algorithms and disappears after 24 hours. And yet, there's something else. A cultural resistance that refuses to die. You see it in documentaries made by teens, in embroidery stitched with ancestral precision, in rap lyrics from Bethlehem that echo with anger and elegance. The Nakba is no longer a word to explain. It's a beat that pulses in every verse, every canvas, every shared memory. Historians still argue whether there's any path left for a two-state solution. Many believe it's already a relic. Some call for one state, with equal rights. Others imagine a confederation, a compromise, a creative solution scribbled on a napkin somewhere. You don't know what the answer is, but you know the current answer isn't working. And you've grown older. You've stopped waiting for peace to arrive like a bus that's just late. You've started planting it quietly in your own yard, in how you teach your children to speak with pride, in how you greet your neighbour across political lines, in how you refuse to be erased, even if the maps try. You speak your truth calmly now, not because it's softer, but because it's stronger. And every time someone says, "It's complicated," you reply, "It's not that complicated. We want to live." And under that ancient sky, you still believe, not in the peace of papers, but in the peace of people who refuse to give up on one another. Because the last chapter is never written by force. You are here, still, after decades of declarations, demolitions, uprisings and summits, after peace talks that echo like broken records, and ceasefires that expire like supermarket fruit. You're still here, not as a symbol, not as a statistic, but as someone who wakes up, boils water for coffee, and looks out the window of a world that never quite made room for you. Your presence is a form of resistance. Now, just existing, speaking Arabic in the old market, teaching your grandchild the name of your grandmother's village, now paved over by a suburb with a swimming pool that is power, quiet power, the kind that can't be mapped or occupied. Around you, the land still breathes. The land never left. The hills didn't ask for a border. The cactus still grows where a house once stood. You walk past rubble and see shadows of gardens. Someone else's children might play there now, but the memory remains. Memory has better stamina than policy. There are new faces now. Young people who weren't alive during the Second Intifada, who only know Oslo through textbooks and grainy footage. They are angry, yes, but also imaginative. Some dream of one-state equality. Some organize boycotts, not bullets. Some build startups, art galleries, digital archives. They don't wait for saviors. They write their own narratives. And Israel, complex, layered, often contradictory, exists beside you, within you, around you. There are citizens who want peace, who protest the occupation, who grieve for your losses as if they were their own, and others, louder for now, who build walls taller than empathy and settlements wider than justice. But even walls crack, even cement forgets its purpose. Globally, your story flares in and out of relevance. But every time the world forgets you, you remind it with a mural, a poem, a march. You don't need them to approve your humanity. You've already claimed it. Historians still argue what the solution is. 2 states, 1 state, a binational democracy, a federation. You've heard them all, and you nod politely, but deep down you know that solutions aren't equations. They're relationships. They're the small acts, sharing water, learning languages, mourning each other's dead. Because what was taken from you wasn't just land. It was time, dignity, and the right to be mundane. To worry about the price of tomatoes instead of the trajectory of rubber bullets. To be bored on a Tuesday. So now you build that mundanity from scratch. You tend to your rooftop garden. You host iftar with friends who disagree with you politically, but never decline your hummus. You repair the shutters before the next storm, natural or man-made. You turn sorrow into something softer, something that can be carried. And maybe, just maybe, your grandchildren will inherit something better. Not just the trauma, not just the struggle, but the resilience too. The songs, the food, the stubborn hope. A future not built on someone else's blueprint, but their own fingerprints. And one day, when they ask how you endured, you'll smile and say, "We didn't wait for the world to remember us. We remembered ourselves." So now, you let it all settle. The noise, the namers, the narratives, they dim into a gentle hush. You've travelled through wars and walls, treaties and tears, memory and momentum. You've stood in a village that no longer stands, walked roads that doubled as borders, listened to lullabies woven with exile, and now you rest. Let the rhythm slow. Let your breath soften. Our olive trees are still there, swaying not for resistance tonight, but simply because the wind remembered how. The sky above Jerusalem doesn't judge. It just holds stars, the same ones your ancestors whispered under, the same ones your children will dream beneath. It's not peace, perhaps, not yet, but it's peace enough for now, enough to close your eyes, to exhale the weight of a century, to feel, truly feel, that the story is still yours to tell, even in silence, especially in silence. There's a child somewhere, in Gaza or Haifa or Hebron, falling asleep to the distant hum of life, persisting. That sound, that's the real anthem, not one of victory, but of survival, stitched with grace. So, my dear traveller, pull the blanket a little closer. Let the lights fade. Let history rest with you. Just for tonight, not as burden, but as belonging. You are home. You are whole. You are heard. Sleep now. The land will keep your place.